They said Darren was the miracle child, the blessing, the strong one. But when Elijah got beaten up behind the school for being too soft, Darren didn't defend him. He turned to their father and said, if he's really gay, maybe he deserved it. Elijah Cross was 12, and that's when he learned what it meant to disappear while still being in the room. He grew up in a quiet corner of Ohio, in a family where the Bible sat heavier than the truth, and love had conditions written in small print. Their father, a stern, church-going mechanic, believed boys should speak few words and never show weakness. Their mother followed, gentle in tone, but never in action. She folded laundry in silence while her sons were sorted like tools in a box. Darren, the shining wrench; Elijah, the bent nail. Darren was the one who played football, aced geometry, and led prayer at youth group. Elijah drew in the margins of hymn books. He played piano, whispered poems to the sky, and cried at animal rescue commercials. At home, he was called sensitive. At school, he was called much worse. In 7th grade, rumors started. A boy in choir smiled too long at Elijah during rehearsal, and that was enough. He was cornered near the science lab, pushed down, kicked once in the ribs. He came home bruised, holding back tears. His father asked what happened. Before Elijah could answer, Darren stepped in. If he's gay, he said, not looking at his brother. He probably asked for it. Their father didn't blink. Their mother didn't speak. And Elijah stopped asking to be seen. But there had been a time brief and shining when Darren had been more than just the golden boy. When he and Elijah were kids, they invented a code together. Symbols in notebooks, carvings on tree trunks, a private language of crooked lines and circles that meant things like safe, hide, or I miss you. It started as a game. Then it became a lifeline. They would leave messages for each other under the loose tile behind the shed. Elijah would draw music notes with hidden meanings. Darren would reply with stars and arrows. Back then, they had each other, even if the world outside didn't make room for both. But as they grew, Darren pulled away. When Elijah turned 14, Darren stopped answering the coded notes. He started calling them kid stuff. The notebook Elijah carried in his backpack, once a bridge between them, became a source of mockery in front of Darren's friends. The carvings in the tree behind their church faded beneath moss and time. Still, Elijah kept the notebook. Not because he thought Darren would return to it, but because it was the only place he ever felt heard. Now, a decade later, Elijah sat in a California apartment hundreds of miles from that house. His hands were calloused from washing dishes and wiping tables during his early years away. He had built a new life from scratch. He became a licensed therapist, counseling young LGBTQ teens who had been pushed out like he once was. But some wounds didn't fade. They just changed color. One morning, his phone buzzed with an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "It's about Darren. Inside." A woman wrote simply, "He's been missing for 3 weeks. The police gave up, but I thought maybe you'd remember the places he doesn't tell anyone about. You were his brother, after all." Elijah stared at the screen. His heart didn't race. It paused, like it knew the only person who could find Darren was the one he had abandoned. If stories like Elijah's resonate with you, stories about family, rejection, and the quiet power of memory, subscribe to Heart Stories. Because some truths live not in what's said, but in what was once carved into the silence. It was after the spring recital. Elijah had just stepped off the stage, hands still tingling from the final note of his original piano piece, one he'd written in secret, hoping for once to be more than invisible. A boy from the orchestra, a friend with gentle eyes and nervous laughter, pulled him into the shadows behind the music room. It was brief, clumsy, honest. They kissed. The next morning, the town wasn't whispering, it was roaring. The choir director stopped looking him in the eye. 3 boys in gym shoved him into a locker. A church elder dropped his offering plate when Elijah walked past. At home, his mother refused to believe it. His father didn't need to. He slammed his hand on the kitchen table and shouted so loud the light above them shook, "You're no son of mine." Elijah didn't argue. He didn't cry. He walked upstairs, packed the few things he had, his notebook, 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, and a copy of Debussy's sheet music. Darren watched from the hallway. He didn't say a word. Elijah left that night and didn't come back for a decade. He landed in California with a name that no longer felt like his and a bank account that barely had enough for bus fare. He washed dishes, scrubbed hotel floors, slept in hostels and church basements. Every night, he whispered the same sentence under his breath, like a prayer I wasn't wrong for feeling. Years passed. He earned his GED at night, then got into community college. He studied psychology not to understand others, but to finally understand himself. The kid with the piano hands and bruised ribs slowly became a man others leaned on. Elijah specialized in trauma-informed therapy for LGBTQ youth, especially those pushed out by family. He never mentioned his own family in sessions, but the way he looked at certain clients, quiet boys with clenched shoulders and too many apologies, said enough. He still had the notebook, still flipped through it on hard days. The codes, the curls, the quiet. He had no photos of Darren. Just memories that showed up uninvited: Darren running ahead of him down a gravel road, tossing a football over his head, laughing when Elijah tripped. Darren sitting stone-faced as their father spat cruel words across the dinner table. Darren saying nothing, over and over again. Then one morning, the email came. It was from a woman named Leslie. I don't know if you remember me. I dated Darren a few years ago. I heard what your family did to you. I'm sorry. I wouldn't reach out unless it was urgent. Darren's missing. It's been 3 weeks. No police report. No answers. I think if anyone could find him, it's you. Elijah didn't move for a long time. He stared at the screen until the words blurred. He thought about deleting the email. He thought about pretending it never came. But then he stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out the journal, the one with the last code Darren ever wrote before he left. And for the first time in years, he opened it. The house looked smaller than he remembered. The shutters sagged, the siding peeled, but the front porch still groaned under his weight like it had when he was a child, sneaking out after curfew. Elijah didn't knock. He barely stepped past the mailbox before the door opened. His father stood in the doorway, arms crossed. The same judgment etched into his face like it had been chiseled there years ago. "You don't belong here," he said. Elijah opened his mouth, but no words came. "I said," the man growled, "Darren doesn't need someone like you." Then the door closed. The wind picked up as Elijah turned away. He had expected this, and yet it still hollowed him out like a slow bruise beneath the skin. He walked for hours, past the frozen fields, past the church bell he used to stare at during Sunday services. His boots left shallow impressions in the snow. He was heading somewhere deeper than home. Behind the old elementary school, tucked past the chain-link fence and forgotten birch trees, was a wooden shack no taller than a garden shed. As boys, he and Darren had called it the Kingdom, a place of moss and secrets, carved initials, and code books hidden in rusted tin boxes. He hadn't been back in 10 years. The door was stuck, swollen from years of rain. Elijah shoved his shoulder against it until it gave way with a crack. Inside, the air smelled of dust and pine sap. Cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners. Then he saw it faint but still there on the inner wall, etched into the wood with a pocket knife dulled by time. "Trust the silence." His breath caught, not because he was surprised to see it, but because he had forgotten he was the one who carved it. Elijah dropped to his knees and reached for his bag. He pulled out the notebook, the one filled with loops and lines. Childhood nonsense to anyone else, but to him, a lifeline. He flipped through the pages until he found the matching symbols. A triangle with 2 short lines beneath it, a crude drawing of a crescent moon beside a zigzag that meant storm. It was a location and a time. Years ago, they used this code to plan their secret meetings, places to hide when they didn't want to be found. Elijah followed the symbols like breadcrumbs. The triangle meant the ridge near the state line. The double lines were the fence behind Miller's farm. The moon and the storm, it meant go, even if the weather turned, and it had turned. By the time he reached the tree line, snow was falling harder, thick, Wind-driven flurries blurred the sky, but Elijah kept going. His breath fogged the air. His fingers ached from the cold, gripping the edges of his coat like armor. He found the path half buried beneath dead leaves. It wound up a slope lined with bare trees. At the top stood a small wooden structure, barely held together, leaning like it had grown tired of standing. A shack, hidden in from view, untouched by time. Elijah approached slowly. The door was cracked open. A blanket hung inside the frame to keep out wind. There was no light, no smoke, no sound, but someone was there. He stepped in and saw him. Darren sat in the far corner, his body wrapped in two old blankets, one of which Elijah recognized from their childhood bedroom. His hair was longer, face sunken, eyes hollow. He looked up and whispered, "I knew you'd remember." Elijah didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just sat down on the floor, across from the brother who had once let him be destroyed in silence and then disappeared. Between them, the cold drifted, but inside Elijah's coat pocket, the journal pulsed like a heartbeat. The last page contained a code he had never translated. Until now, the silence in the shack was heavier than the cold. It filled the corners, settled between their bodies like unspoken things gathering dust. Elijah sat cross-legged on the floor, his coat damp from snow, eyes fixed on his brother, the golden boy now dimmed. Darren looked older, not in years, but in weight. His face was pale beneath the days of stubble, lips cracked, fingers twitching beneath the blanket. "I didn't know where else to go," Darren said, voice hoarse. "Everyone's watching me. The press, the firm, even the clients. One mistake and the whole tower came down." Elijah didn't respond. "Not yet," Darren continued, words unraveling. "It wasn't just one deal. It was years of covering things up, illegal zoning permits, backdoor donations, forged reports. I knew it would catch up. Then one leak, and suddenly I'm the story." He pulled a crumpled newspaper clipping from his backpack, handed it over without looking. "Corruption scandal. High-profile legal advisor. Under fire." Elijah read the headline once, then folded it, slid it into his pocket. "I couldn't let them see me unravel." Darren whispered, "Not them, not him." Elijah knew who him meant. Their father, the man who raised them to believe that failure was weakness and emotion was shame. Darren had worn his mask for so long, it had fused with his skin, and now it was cracking. "I kept thinking," Darren muttered, "where would I go that no one would think to look?" He looked up, meeting Elijah's gaze. Only one person knew this place still existed. A long pause passed between them. Elijah slowly reached into his coat and took out the journal. It was worn soft with time. The ink in some corners smudged. He turned to the final page, one he had never dared decode. There, among the curling lines and stars, was a sequence of symbols that once meant something simple. "If I ever disappear, find me here." He showed Darren the page. Darren gave a weak smile. "You always remembered more than I did." Elijah stared at his brother for a long time, not in anger, not even in confusion, just with the heaviness of someone ready to ask a question he had buried for too long. "Do you remember that night when I was 17, he said quietly. After the piano recital, Darren tensed. His fingers curled. Elijah's voice cracked. "I walked out into the woods, took all the pills I'd saved. I thought if I vanished, no one would care. Not you, not them." He looked away, blinking fast. "But I woke up, on the mattress, cold, alive. I never knew why." The air turned still. Darren didn't speak at first, but something in him shifted. His hands dropped the blanket. His eyes glistened, not from cold, but from memory. "I found you," he whispered. Elijah froze. "I followed you through the trees. I thought you just needed air. But then, I saw the bottle." He swallowed. "You were barely breathing. I carried you home, snuck you through the basement. You threw up in your sleep. I cleaned it, sat there all night, Elijah pressed a hand to his chest. His heart was racing like it needed to catch up with the truth. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked. Darren looked down. "Because I didn't do it to be a hero," he said. "I did it because I couldn't watch you disappear, but I also couldn't face what it meant." He paused. "If I had told Dad, he would have called you pathetic. If I told you, Gwen, you would have hated me for waiting that long to care. So I buried it." Elijah closed his eyes. The cabin walls felt closer now, like they were listening. "I thought you hated me," he said. "I was scared of you." Darren replied, "You were living your truth. I was living for his approval, and it broke me." They sat in the quiet for a while, not with distance, but with understanding. Not all silences were cruel. Some were heavy with love that didn't know how to speak. Elijah stood up and walked to Darren's side. He placed the journal on his brother's lap. "You don't have to disappear," he said. "Not anymore." Darren didn't smile. He just closed his hand over the cover. A silent thank you. A truce. A chance. Elijah stepped outside. The wind had quieted. In the trees above, snow began to fall again. But this time, it didn't sting. Elijah didn't take Darren home. He drove through the snowy back roads in silence, the heater humming low. Darren asleep in the passenger seat, his head against the window, breath fogging the glass. The lights of the town faded behind them, until only the sound of tires on wet pavement remained. 2 counties over, tucked between pine trees and hills, sat a modest 2-story building with no sign. The kind of place built not to fix people, but to give them space to stop pretending they didn't need fixing. Elijah helped Darren through the door. No camera crews, no judgment, just a receptionist with tired eyes and a clipboard, in a room with blankets that smelled of lavender and thyme. Darren turned before he was led away. "Tell them I'm sorry," he said. Elijah didn't ask who them was. It didn't matter. The next morning, Elijah's phone buzzed with a message from a number he hadn't saved. It was his mother. "Please don't go to the press. Your father is being questioned at church. Darren's name is still in the papers. We've already lost so much. Don't make this worse." There was no mention of concern, no question of how Elijah was doing. No thank you for finding their son, just a plea to preserve the family's image. He stared at the message for a long time, then typed only one sentence in reply: "I haven't said a word because you never listened when I did." He powered off his phone. Weeks passed. Elijah returned to California. He resumed his therapy work, taught a night course at a local community college, and began writing in the margins of a new notebook. The old one, filled with childhood codes and scars, sat quietly on a shelf, not erased, just finished. He published a short memoir with a small press, the title "The Children They Chose Not to See." It wasn't a bestseller, but it reached people. Strangers sent him letters. Young men whispered thank you after lectures. A boy, with shaking hands, once said, "Reading your story made me believe I could come out and survive it." Elijah nodded. He didn't say it would be easy. He never promised that, but he could promise it was possible. He never went back to the old house. Once, driving through his hometown for a speaking event, he saw his mother through a window, trimming hedges. She didn't look up. He didn't stop. Some distances aren't meant to be closed. Some families don't want to be mended. And some healing is found not in reunion, but in release. One rainy evening, Elijah sat beneath his apartment's reading lamp and reopened the last letter Darren had written. The words still ached, but no longer bled. He thought about that night long ago when he almost gave up, and the brother who saved him without ever admitting it. He had been loved, imperfectly, quietly, and that, somehow, had been enough to survive. If someone once hurt you deeply, then saved you quietly, could you forgive them? Would you call that redemption? Or just more damage in disguise? Let us know in the comments below. And if stories like Elijah's speak to something in your own life, subscribe to Heart Stories, because the stories that hurt the most are often the ones that heal us best.